The envelope came on a Tuesday. It sat on my bunk for 6 hours before I read the address on the front. Not my name, not my unit designation. Just a call sign, written in my brother's left-handed block print. The letters pressed hard like he always did when he was being careful about something. Ash Run Motor Pool, Fob Callard. I'd been stationed at Callard for 11 weeks by then. I knew every name on that motor pool wall chart. I had the duty roster memorized. I'd done 2 supply runs through that bay every week since I arrived. None of the names on that roster were Ash Run. I held the envelope for a long time before I walked it down myself. Marcus came home from the Davin Valley deployment different in the way that men come home different when they aren't going to explain it to you. He was quieter, not broken. Marcus wasn't a man who broke, but rearranged, like someone had moved all the furniture in him 2 inches to the left, and he was still navigating by the old map. He didn't talk about it. I was 22 and newly assigned and trying to close the gap between us the only way I knew how, which was to ask questions he'd walk away from. He was 31. He'd been in places I hadn't. The gap between us was 11 years of rank and one valley I'd never see, and I kept reaching across it with questions he wasn't ready to answer. What I knew. His element had taken fire on extract. Heavy, sustained, LZ hot. The first 2 birds had made their approach and waved off. A third had come in anyway. What I didn't know, who was flying the 3rd bird. He told me once, in the first month after he got back, that someone had come back for them. Those were the words he used. Not that they'd been rescued. Not that a bird had finally cleared. Someone came back. Like it was a choice a person had made about them specifically, about whether they were worth going back for. I asked who. He said I wouldn't know her. I asked if he'd reached out, tracked her down. He said he was working on a letter. That was 14 months before the envelope arrived. I met her 6 weeks into my posting. She was under the front chassis of a transport vehicle, boots sticking out into the aisle, grease on her forearms up to the elbow. The motor pool sergeant, a broad and unhurried man named Dills, who had been running that yard for 9 years, had sent me down to Bay 3 for a coolant fitting. He'd told me to ask the woman working the chassis. I called down to her. She slid out, squinting against the fluorescent light. She was maybe 40. Short hair, crow's feet deep enough to be permanent, greased dark hands she wiped on her thigh without looking at them. She wore a plain tan blouse with no rank showing, no name tape on this one. The worn utility kind you put on when you know you're not going to stay. Clean. She had the economy of motion that long-practiced people have. The kind that doesn't waste a single degree of movement, where everything happens at exactly the speed it needs to, and no faster. I told her what I needed. She found the fitting in 30 seconds, handed it over without ceremony, slid back under. I said, "You're the mechanic?" She said from under the chassis. Among other things. I didn't ask what the other things were. I had coolant fittings to return and a formations in 40 minutes and no particular reason to stand in a motor pool bay conducting a conversation with someone's maintenance contractor. I filed her away as exactly that. The motor pool woman. The one in Bay 3. The one who knew where the fittings were. I went back twice that month for parts. She was there both times. She knew every inventory number by memory, could put her hand on any component in that bay without looking at the shelves first. She was patient with my questions in the flat, efficient way that experienced people are patient with inexperienced ones. Managing rather than engaging. I thought she was quiet because she was unimportant. I thought the quiet was the whole of her. I was 22. I had a great deal left to learn about what quiet covers. The letter from Marcus arrived on a Tuesday. I read the address on the front, and I sat with it for a long time. And then I went down to Motor Pool Records at 07:30 the next morning and asked Dills, who logged in under the call sign Ash Run. He looked at me. Not a long look, but a considered one. The kind that's measuring the reason for the question before it decides how to answer. "What do you want her for?" I told him my brother had served in the Davin Valley. That a letter had come. Dills set down the clipboard he was holding. He looked at it on the table for a moment, then back at me. "Bay 3, he said. She was at the workbench when I came in. The bay was quiet. Mid-morning. The other mechanics out on a recovery job 2 blocks east. She had a cracked housing open in front of her and was cleaning the interior, with a cloth with the same meticulous patience she did everything else. Unhurried, methodical, her attention entirely on the work in her hands. I said her call sign. She went still, not frozen, still, the way a person goes still when they've been found by something they were expecting but didn't know when to expect, and now that it's arrived, they need a moment to take the shape of it. She turned around. I said my brother's name. She looked at me for a long time without speaking, and I watched something move behind her eyes that I didn't have the vocabulary for yet. Not grief, not pride. Something older than both those, the kind of thing that lives in the space between a decision you made and the weight of what that decision turned out to mean. She'd been carrying the specific gravity of that night for 14 months, without anyone in this building knowing it, because she was in Bay 3 and nobody asked. She said he made it out. Not a question. She knew he'd made it. She was saying it aloud the way you say a true thing, to hear it exist in the room with you, to verify it's still real outside your own memory. I said he had. I said he'd been at a VA facility for 3 months for fragment work on his shoulder, that he was stateside now, working a civilian job, doing better, that the rearrangement in him had mostly settled. She nodded once, very slightly, and turned back to the housing. I put the envelope on the workbench beside her. She looked at it, at the call sign on the front in my brother's block print, at the handwriting she apparently recognized, because something happened in her jaw, a small tightening, the kind that is the body's way of deciding it will hold. She picked it up and held it in both hands. She did not open it. I said, I didn't know it was you when I came in here for parts. The first time. She said, I know. I said, I called you the motor pool woman. She said, I know that too. What I learned afterward came from 2 sources. Dills, who told me what he'd seen that night on the flight line when Ash Run came back in, and an incident investigation summary I had no formal clearance to read, but that Dills left open on his desk when he went to get coffee and didn't. Close when he came back. The LZ at grid reference Callan 7 was declared hot at 1947. 2 medevac birds had made approach, taken fire, and waved off before the situation was deemed uncleared. A third aircraft, a modified UH-660 out of Callard, her aircraft, call sign Ash Run, made its approach at 1953. Without clearance, without authorization from operations. The official language for this is exceeded operational mandate. What it means in plain terms is that she went back in when she wasn't supposed to. She came in low and fast, rotor wash kicking up the valley floor, taking direct fire from 2 positions on the eastern ridgeline. The aircraft took 14 confirmed impacts on the approach alone. She set down in the only available flat space in Callan 7, which was 30 meters shorter than the field manual required, and angled 7 degrees off, level. Setting a UH-60 down on a surface like that under fire is not something the manual covers, because the manual assumes you are making rational decisions. She held it on the ground for 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Dills told me this quietly, standing in the doorway of his office. 4 minutes and 20 seconds is a very long time. When someone is as actively trying to put rounds through your airframe. In that window, she loaded 14 men. 2 were carried on. 1 was my brother, shoulder already packed, still conscious enough to pull himself up the loading step and help brace the man behind him. She lifted off with a door gunner down, a main rotor blade clipped at the tip, and avionics throwing cautions. She would have known better than to read while she was flying. She made Callard Airfield in the dark with 9 minutes of fuel remaining. Dills was on the flight line when she came in. He said she set the aircraft down with the same economy she set everything down with, exactly as hard as it needed to be and no harder, and climbed out and checked the rotor clip herself before anyone else touched it. The investigation closed without further action. The report noted she had exceeded operational authority, and in the same paragraph, that 14 personnel declared lost at 1952 were alive at the time of filing. Her classification supplement, which I found separately, showed 7 prior combat extractions. 3 of those contested LZ recoveries. In 2 of them, her flight element had waved off and she had made solo approaches, both also logged as uncleared. In both cases, everyone aboard came home. A theater aviation commander had written a single handwritten line in the supplement's margin. Pilot demonstrates consistent willingness to exceed operational mandate where survival outcome is achievable. Recommend continued clearance, which is the official language for she goes back when no one else will, and she brings people out, so you let her go. The call sign Ash Run appeared 7 times in that file. Her given name appeared once, on the cover sheet, and I won't write it here. She is still at Callard. She is still in Bay 3. She is the kind of person who should decide when her name travels, and so I will leave that to her. When I came back to the bay, she was still at the workbench. The letter was gone from the bench surface. I didn't ask where she'd put it. I stood there for a moment, not knowing what to do with my hands or my face, which is something that happens when you've spent 6 weeks calling a person the motor pool woman and then read the 14 impact approach log, and the 4-minute 20-second ground time, and the 9 minutes of fuel landing that kept your brother's heart beating. She didn't make it easier for me. She wasn't cruel about it. She simply didn't perform anything for my comfort. She kept cleaning the housing. She let me stand there with the weight of it. I said I should have asked who you were. The first time, she said, "A lot of people don't." I said, "That's not an excuse." She said, "No, it isn't." She set down the cloth. She held the housing up to the light, checked the interior, set it down, and picked up the next one. I asked if there was anything she needed, anything I could do. I heard how small that was as it came out of my mouth. She said, "Know the names in your motor pool." I said I would. She said, "Know the names in every room you walk into. Not the rank, not the role, the name." My brother's letter was 3 pages. I know because she told me later, told me once in the plain way she told things. She said it was the most precisely written letter she had ever received. She said she read it twice, and then folded it back into the envelope and placed it in the breast pocket of her field jacket. That's where she keeps it. She didn't tell me what it said. It was between her and my brother, and the 4 minutes and 20 seconds they'd shared, in the dark at the bottom of a valley that neither of them talks about except to each other. What I carry is simpler than that. I know that 14 men walked out of Collins 7 because one person went back when she was not required to. I know that for 6 weeks person handed me fittings and answered my parts questions. And I called her the motor pool woman and didn't once ask her name. I know her name now. I know every name in my motor pool, and I know the names in every room I walk into, and when I log them, I write them fully, first and last, and every designation they've earned. Because it is the smallest correction I can make. It is not enough. I do it anyway. There is a woman in Bay 3 at Fob Callard. She keeps a letter in her breast pocket. She knows things about going back into the dark that most people will never be called to know. She does not announce them. She comes in the morning and goes home in the evening, and if you walk past her, without stopping, she will allow it. Don't allow it.